The radar operator's tea has gone cold. He doesn't notice. Outside the concrete bunker buried beneath Hanoi, monsoon rain hammers the earth with the kind of violence that grounds everything with wings. Inside, the screens glow green and empty. December 1972, and the American bombers haven't touched the capital in months. The integrated air defense system, Soviet-designed, North Vietnamese perfected, has become a steel ceiling that nothing penetrates. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen leans back in his chair. The youngest operator, barely 20, asks if they should maintain full alert through the storm. Nguyen laughs. In this weather? The Americans value their lives too much. The bunker smells of cigarette smoke and electrical components, that particular scent of vacuum tubes working overtime. Thunder rolls through the walls. Or what they assume is thunder. The SAM batteries outside are useless tonight. Visibility 0. Ceiling 0. Winds that would tear a B-52 formation apart before any missile had the chance. The weather has done what their SA-2 guideline missiles have been doing for months. Made the sky over Hanoi a graveyard waiting to happen. American air crews call it the most dangerous airspace on Earth. Tonight, it's not airspace at all. It's a washing machine of wind shear and rain cells that would kill you before enemy action got the chance. Nguyen checks his watch. 200 hours. The skeleton crew runs through routine checks, but there's nothing routine about the confidence in this room. They've earned it. Since October, they've forced the Americans to stop daylight raids entirely. The hunter has become the hunted. B-52s now fly only at night, only at altitude, only in carefully planned waves that give air defense crews time to drink tea between engagements. The system works. The radar screens show exactly what they should show. Nothing. Storm cells bloom and fade in green phosphorescence. Rain creates false returns that operators learn to read like a second language. Nguyen knows every ghost echo, every weather pattern that mimics an aircraft signature. What he's looking at now is pure meteorological chaos. Perfect. Somewhere above the clouds, lightning strobes. The bunker's lights flicker once, twice. Standard for storms this violent. The backup generators kick in with their familiar diesel rumble. Everything is exactly as it should be. The Americans are grounded. The capital is safe. The tea is cold, but the night is colder, and both will be over by morning. The operator's hand reaches for a fresh cigarette. His fingers never complete the motion. The first explosion hits 3 kilometers north. The bunker doesn't shake, it jumps. Concrete dust falls from ceiling seams that haven't moved in 8 years. Nguyen's teacup shatters on the floor. The lights die completely for 2 seconds that stretch into forever. When emergency lighting floods red, every man in the room is already on his feet, hands frozen over controls, staring at radar screens that show nothing but storm static. Then the second explosion, closer, then the third. The Paul Doomer Bridge spans the Red River like a steel spine. Spans, past tense. By 02:15 hours, 3 central spans are collapsing into black water. The Yen Vian railway yards, where Soviet locomotive stage supplies for the front, become a crater field. Fuel storage tanks at Kep Airfield Fountain flame 300 feet high, turning night into day, monsoon rain into steam. Every target is strategic. Every target is hardened. Every target was supposed to be untouchable tonight. The bombs arrive before the sound. Witnesses who survive, and there are fewer than expected, describe the same impossible sequence. First, the explosion. Then, 3 or 4 seconds later, a sound like distant thunder rolling through valleys, fading before they can identify direction. No air raid sirens, no radar warning, no time to run. The shelters designed to protect workers remain empty because nobody knows there's anything to protect against. North Vietnamese air defense doctrine is built on layers. First layer, Early warning radar picks up formations over Laos, gives 30 minutes notice. Second layer, SAM sights force bombers high, where MiGs can intercept. Third layer, anti-aircraft artillery fills the sky with steel. Tonight, all three layers fire blindly into storm clouds, tracking nothing, hitting nothing, while below them the infrastructure of war burns. The Hanoi thermal power plant takes 4 direct hits. Transformers explode in cascades of sparks that look like fireworks through the rain. The city goes dark in sections, rolling blackouts spreading like dominoes. In the blackness, more explosions. The Gia Lam storage depot, the Van Dien vehicle depot, the Bac Mai transshipment yard. Each target miles apart, each strike within minutes of the others. The mathematics don't work. B-52s fly in formations, drop in patterns, show up on radar like flying cities. This is something else. At Fujian Air Base, MiG-21 interceptors sit on the runway. Pilots in cockpits, engines hot, waiting for vectors that never come. Ground control has no vectors to give. The rain-soaked runways reflect firelight from burning fuel dumps, and the fighters never launch because there's nothing to intercept. The enemy is already gone. Was never there according to the radar screens that still show only weather. Soviet advisors arrive at dawn with Geiger counters and radiation detectors, checking for nuclear weapons. The precision suggests cruise missiles, but cruise missiles don't carry 2,000-pound bombs. The crater patterns suggest dive bombing, but nothing dives in zero visibility. One advisor examines impact craters at the Hanoi Railway switching yard and does the mathematics of angle and velocity. He sets down his clipboard. This aircraft was flying at 300 meters, in this storm, at over 900 kilometers per hour. His North Vietnamese counterpart asks what type of aircraft can do this. The Soviet advisor is 47 years old, flew Sturmovix over Berlin, helped design the integrated air defense system that's supposed to make this impossible. He's watched his doctrine, his life's work, fail in a single night. He stares at the crater and says what everyone is thinking, but nobody wants to speak aloud. None. No aircraft can do this. The rain continues. The fires burn despite it. And somewhere in the chaos, someone finds wreckage that changes everything. A piece of wing assembly with mechanisms that make no sense. Swept angles that no bomber uses. Hydraulics designed for something that shouldn't exist at altitudes where trees can kill you. The wreckage arrives at Hanoi's intelligence headquarters in a truck bed, covered in mud and hydraulic fluid. Senior analysts crowd around like surgeons examining an impossible patient. The wing section is swept back at angles they've never seen on American bombers, sharp, aggressive, designed for speed. But the hydraulic assemblies tell a different story. These are low-speed components, mechanisms for generating lift at velocities where swept wings become liabilities. No aircraft uses both. It's like finding a sprinter's legs attached to a weightlifter's torso. Colonel Tran, who learned radar theory in Moscow, builds his first hypothesis on cruise missiles. The Americans must have deployed a new weapon, unmanned, pre-programmed, flying terrain-following profiles beneath radar coverage. His team calculates payload weights from crater analysis. 2,000 pounds minimum per strike. He does the mathematics twice, then a third time, because cruise missiles don't carry ordnance that heavy. The fuel-to-payload ratio makes it impossible. The guidance systems don't exist. He crosses out cruise missiles and starts over. The second theory centers on new stealth technology. American engineers have somehow built bombers invisible to radar, flying traditional high-altitude profiles while Soviet-designed systems sweep empty sky. But the bomb impact angles contradict this. High-altitude weapons fall at predictable trajectories. These craters show near horizontal delivery. Physics doesn't lie. Whatever dropped these bombs was flying low enough to wave at farmers, fast enough to outrun sound, and precise enough to hit switching yards in zero visibility. The math keeps breaking. SAM battery commanders submit reports that read like fever dreams. Captain Duke at Site 6 describes his radar acquiring a target for exactly 1.7 seconds before it vanished. Not shot down, not jammed, simply gone. The tracking data shows an aircraft accelerating through impossible velocity curves while descending into terrain that should have killed it. His targeting computer refused the solution 3 times, flagging the data as sensor malfunction. He watched his missiles launch anyway, chasing ghosts into mountains. Site 11 reports similar encounters. Target acquisition at 15 kilometers, traveling at 450 knots, altitude dropping from 1,000 meters to 200 meters in 12 seconds. The mathematics suggest a dive angle that would tear conventional aircraft apart. The missiles track, the missiles guide, the missiles detonate in empty air exactly where the target should have been. Radar shows the aircraft continuing, unbothered, already 5 kilometers past the explosion, before the SAM operators process what happened. Intelligence officers interview civilians from a dozen strike zones. The stories match with disturbing consistency. No engine sound before the bombs. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a sound afterward, distant thunder that seems to come from the wrong direction. One farmer describes standing in his field when the bridge exploded 2 kilometers away, waiting for the inevitable roar of jet engines, hearing only rain and echoes. Another reports a shape, just once, visible for perhaps 2 seconds as lightning strobed, a silhouette that looked wrong, wings at angles that shifted as he watched, gone before his mind could process what his eyes reported. The theories multiply. Advanced autopilot systems, terrain mapping radar, inertial navigation immune to jamming. Each explanation covers one impossible thing while creating 3 new impossibilities. Colonel Tran spreads reconnaissance photos across his desk. Bomb craters marching through defended zones like a surgeon's incisions. Each strike surgical despite conditions that should make precision bombing fantasy. He circles the Yen Vian railway yards on the map, where something threaded between SAM sites under radar coverage, through a storm that grounded their own helicopters. The answer lives in a radar system that thinks 60 times per second. Inside the F-111's nose, terrain following radar pulses map the Earth in 3 dimensions faster than human neurons can fire. The system doesn't see terrain. It predicts it, building a digital model of valleys and ridges and power lines 3 miles ahead, updating constantly, calculating a flight path that keeps the aircraft exactly 200 feet above whatever wants to kill it. 200 feet, not 2,000, not 500. 200 feet of clearance between supersonic aircraft and sudden death, maintained automatically while the pilot's hands rest light on the controls, monitoring rather than flying, trusting mathematics and electricity to do what no human reflexes could accomplish. The F-111 doesn't dodge mountains. It flows over them like water finding downhill paths, rising and falling with terrain contours while traveling faster than commercial jets at cruise altitude. The radar pulses paint an invisible picture. A ridgeline ahead registers as rising terrain density. The computer calculates pitch angle, rate of climb, energy management. Control surfaces adjust before the human eye could process what's coming. The aircraft begins its climb 3 seconds before the terrain becomes visible, cresting the ridge with computer-calculated precision, then diving into the valley beyond while the terrain-following system recalculates the new environment. 60 times per second, every second, without rest, without distraction, without the fatigue that would kill human pilots in minutes. Inside the cockpit, 2 men watch instruments that glow red to preserve night vision. The pilot flies the aircraft during takeoff and landing, during combat if something breaks. Otherwise, he monitors. The weapons officer in the right seat manages navigation, handles the bombing computers, talks to the terrain radar like a conductor leading an orchestra. Between them, They do the work that requires 6 men in a B-52: navigator, bombardier, radar operator, electronic warfare officer. The F-111 compresses all those functions into integrated systems where computers talk to each other faster than humans can talk to humans. The ride feels like nothing else in aviation. At 200 feet, traveling 600 miles per hour, the earth blurs beneath you. Trees become a green smear. Hills rush up and fall away with amusement park intensity. But inside the cockpit, the sensation is smoothness, the aircraft rising and falling in gentle undulations as terrain following radar negotiates with physics. No jerking corrections, no panic maneuvers, just fluid motion through three-dimensional space, while the ground screams past, close enough to touch. This is how you penetrate the most defended airspace on Earth. Not by flying high where SAM sites can see you coming from 50 miles away, where radar has 10 minutes to calculate firing solutions, where MiGs can climb to intercept. You fly low, so low that radar beams pass overhead, so low that missiles can't dive fast enough, so low that by the time sound reaches enemy ears, you're already gone. The terrain becomes your shield, the speed becomes your weapon, the computer becomes your survival. North Vietnamese radar operators weren't incompetent. Their equipment wasn't faulty. They simply existed in a paradigm where bombers flew high and slow, where radar coverage extended to the horizon, where air defense doctrine assumed you could see the enemy coming. The F-111 deleted those assumptions. It arrived from below, from the radar blind spot that everyone knew existed, but nobody thought could be exploited at 600 miles per hour in the dark during a monsoon. But terrain following radar only explained how they survived. It didn't explain how they adapted. The wings move, not metaphorically, physically, hydraulically, sweeping backward and forward through 16 degrees of motion while the aircraft flies. At full sweep, the F-111 becomes a dart, minimizing drag for supersonic dash across open territory where speed matters more than maneuverability. The wings knife back at 72.5 degrees, and the aircraft accelerates through Mach 1.2 like it's falling downhill, eating distance between threat zones. Then the target area approaches. The wings sweep forward to 16 degrees, transforming the dart into a buzzard. Lift increases. Stall speed drops. The same aircraft that just crossed Laos at supersonic speeds now throttles back to 450 knots and drops into valleys. Wings spread wide for low-altitude knife fighting, where air is thick and margins are measured in seconds. One airframe, two personalities, switching between them with hydraulic pumps and computer commands. This is variable geometry, and it solves the oldest problem in aviation: the compromise between speed and lift. Fixed-wing aircraft choose one or the other. Fighters sacrifice range for agility. Bombers sacrifice speed for payload. The F-111 refuses the choice. Its wings sweep back for the penetration flight, then forward for the bombing run, then back again for the escape. The aircraft adapts to the mission phase like a boxer switching between styles mid-fight. Inside that adaptability lives another revolution. The avionics bay behind the cockpit houses computers that turn raw data into tactical advantage. Inertial navigation systems track position without external references. No GPS satellites, no radio beacons, just gyroscopes and accelerometers calculating velocity and direction, updating position estimates even when every electronic warfare system in North Vietnam is screaming jamming signals. The aircraft knows where it is within 50 meters after flying 600 miles through darkness and storm cells. The bombing computer takes that position data and merges it with radar mapping, with preloaded target coordinates, with weapon ballistics tables. The weapons officer designates a target by moving a cursor across his radar display. The computer calculates release point, accounting for airspeed, altitude, wind, weapon characteristics. At the precise millisecond, not second, millisecond, the bombs release automatically. Human hands steady the aircraft. Silicon makes the decision that used to require bombardiers staring through optical sights, dropping manually, hoping the mathematics worked out. 2 men doing 6 men's work isn't about efficiency. It's about survival. Fewer crew members means smaller cockpit, less weight, tighter airframe. Less weight means more fuel, more range, more payload. More fuel means penetrating deeper into denied territory. More payload means each sortie hits harder. The F-111 carries the same bomb load as a B-17 Flying Fortress that needed 10 men and defensive guns and formation flying to survive World War II. This aircraft does it alone, at night, in conditions that would kill the bombers it replaced. North Vietnamese air defenses were designed around B-52 doctrine: high altitude, predictable flight paths, large formations creating radar signatures visible from neighboring countries. SAM batteries calculated intercept courses with time to spare. MiGs climbed to altitude with vectors from ground control. Anti-aircraft guns filled predicted flight paths with explosive shells. The entire system assumed bombers behaved like bombers, vulnerable, ponderous, committed to straight-line approaches that gave defenders time to react. The F-111 wasn't a bomber. It was a predator that happened to carry bombs. It flew fighter profiles at bomber payload. It navigated like a cruise missile with a human brain. It struck like precision artillery with intercontinental range. Every assumption that made integrated air defense work became a liability when the threat refused to play by established rules. The SA-2 guideline missile is a masterpiece of Soviet engineering. It accelerates to Mach 3.5, carries a 430-pound warhead, and can engage targets at 60,000 feet. Its radar guidance system can track a bomber through jamming and chaff, adjusting course mid-flight to intercept aircraft trying to evade. Against B-52s flying predictable patterns at high altitude, it's devastatingly effective. Against the F-111, it becomes an expensive firework. The problem is time. The SA-2 needs 30 seconds from target acquisition to impact. 30 seconds for radar to establish track. 30 seconds for fire control computers to calculate intercept geometry. 30 seconds for the missile to boost, turn, and guide to target. At high altitude, where bombers cruise at 500 miles per hour, 30 seconds gives you 5 miles of intercept opportunity. Mathematics and physics align. The system works. At 200 feet, traveling 600 miles per hour, 30 seconds gives you 5 miles of reaction window. But the F-111 doesn't appear on radar until it's already inside that window. Terrain masking keeps it invisible until the last possible moment, and that moment arrives too late. Radar acquisition happens at 3 miles. Fire control needs 15 seconds minimum to generate a firing solution. The aircraft crosses those 3 miles in 18 seconds. The missiles launch into empty sky, chasing radar echoes of something already past the SAM envelope, already diving into the next valley where terrain breaks radar lock again. Even if the missiles launch in time, physics betrays them. The SA-2 is designed for high-altitude intercepts where thin air allows graceful turns and long-range guidance. At low altitude, air density transforms elegant weapons into clumsy battering rams. The missiles can't dive fast enough, can't turn tight enough, can't adjust for an aircraft that's hugging terrain contours while accelerating. They detonate where the target should have been, would have been if the target followed predictable flight paths. The F-111 makes no such promises. Radar-guided anti-aircraft guns face similar mathematics. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka tracks targets automatically, swinging quad-barreled death in computer-calculated arcs. Against helicopters and slow-moving aircraft, it's lethal. Against something crossing its engagement zone in 9 seconds, it's decorative. By the time the guns slew to track, by the time the fire control radar establishes lead angles, the target has already transited from approach to departure. The shells chase contrails and exhaust heat, detonating in air that the F-111 vacated before the first round left the barrel. North Vietnamese gunners try everything. They pre-position guns along suspected approach routes. They fire barrage patterns into valleys, hoping volume compensates for precision. They coordinate multiple SAM sites for overlapping coverage. Every tactic assumes one critical factor: time to react. The F-111 gives them none. It appears and vanishes like a magic trick, present only long enough for bombs to fall, gone before countermeasures can engage. The psychological impact compounds the tactical failure. Air defense crews sit at stations, watching radar screens, knowing the enemy is out there, knowing bombs are falling, unable to engage. The integrated air defense system that protected Hanoi, that downed American aircraft weekly, becomes a spectator to its own obsolescence. Crews fire missiles at nothing, launch MiGs that find empty sky, track phantoms that evaporate before weapons can guide. The frustration births desperation. Commanders order guns to fire blindly into storm clouds during raids. SAM batteries launch on unconfirmed radar contacts. MiG pilots patrol at low altitude, hoping to stumble across the enemy visually. Nothing works. The hunter has become the hunted, and the hunted refuses to be seen until after it's killed. Sound travels at 761 miles per hour at sea level. The F-111 travels at 600 miles per hour at 200 feet. The mathematics creates a phenomenon that North Vietnamese soldiers name before they understand it. They call it whispering death. Not because the aircraft is quiet, but because silence precedes annihilation. Picture the geometry. The F-111 approaches a target at 600 miles per hour. Engines screaming at maximum continuous thrust. Compressor blades spinning at thousands of RPM. Exhaust gases exiting at supersonic velocities. The noise is tremendous, 140 decibels, enough to cause permanent hearing damage at close range. But the sound waves travel backward and outward from the aircraft, propagating at 761 miles per hour, while the source moves forward at 600 miles per hour. The gap between aircraft and sound narrows to 161 miles per hour of differential. A soldier standing 1 mile from the F-111's flight path hears nothing. The aircraft passes his position in 6 seconds. The sound waves from that passage reach his ears 17 seconds later. By the time his brain processes the roar of jet engines, the aircraft is 3 miles away and already gone. The bombs arrive during the silence. They detonate. Then, seconds afterward, the sound finally reaches him, a rolling thunder that seems to come from the wrong direction, fading before he can orient on it. The effect intensifies in valleys where terrain channels sound waves unpredictably. Mountains create echoes that bounce and distort. A single aircraft pass generates acoustic chaos, engine roar reflecting off ridges, arrival sounds mixing with departure sounds, creating the impression of multiple aircraft from multiple directions. Defenders hear the war happening around them without seeing the enemy, without acquiring targets, without understanding where to point their weapons, until after the moment has passed. North Vietnamese troops describe the sensation in letters home, in after-action reports, in whispered conversations between men who've survived strikes. The waiting is worse than the impact. You hear thunder, or think you hear thunder, but it's the wrong kind of thunder, coming from valleys instead of clouds, moving laterally instead of overhead. Then the explosions, sudden and close, and only then the sound of what caused them, a fading roar that offers no tactical information because the source has already escaped. The psychological dimensions match the acoustic ones. Human survival instinct depends on cause and effect patterns. Hear danger, identify direction, take cover. The F-111 breaks that chain. Effect precedes cause. Bombs detonate before engines roar. The natural order inverts, and with it goes the illusion of control. You can't take cover from something you can't hear coming. You can't orient weapons against threats that announce themselves only in retrospect. If you want to watch more stories like this, and trust me, the next one gets even more impossible. Subscribe now before we get to the part where American pilots start deliberately messing with Soviet doctrine just to prove they can. But first, back to North Vietnam, where whispering death isn't propaganda or battlefield mythology. It's an acoustic phenomenon with a body count. Anti-aircraft crews abandon positions when they hear the wrong kind of silence. The absence before the presence. The quiet that means bombs are already falling. SAM operators flinch at sounds that might be engines, might be echoes, might be imagination. The integrated air defense system requires calm professionalism and steady nerves. The F-111 destroys both, not through firepower, but through the simple inversion of expectation. Death whispers because it arrives before it announces itself, and the announcement comes too late to matter. The numbers tell a story that air defense commanders refuse to believe until the war ends and classified reports become history. Operation Linebacker II, December 1972. The 11-day campaign that breaks North Vietnam's will to continue negotiations. The U.S. Air Force commits everything: B-52s, F-4 Phantoms, A-6 Intruders, Navy strike packages. The skies over Hanoi become the most concentrated air battle since World War II. F-111s fly 4,000 sorties into that inferno. 4,000 missions into airspace defended by 1-200 radar-guided anti-aircraft guns, 150 SAM sites, and MiG interceptors operating from bases so close that pilots can scramble and engage within minutes. The mathematics of attrition suggest carnage. Historical loss rates from earlier campaigns, Rolling Thunder, Linebacker Wall, predict dozens of aircraft should fall. Air Force planners budget for acceptable losses, knowing some crews won't return, calculating the exchange ratio that makes the campaign strategically viable, despite tactical casualties. 6 F-111s go down, not 60, not 16. 6 aircraft lost from 4,000 sorties. The loss rate calculates to 0.15%, a number so low that intelligence officers initially flag it as reporting error. They cross-reference with North Vietnamese records captured after the war. The number holds: 6 losses. Some from mechanical failure, some from golden BB shots, random anti-aircraft fire that finds the 1-in-a-million trajectory. Not one to SAM missiles employed as designed. Not one to MiG intercepts. The integrated air defense system that defines Soviet doctrine, that protects Moscow, that creates the theoretical framework for defending high-value targets against air attack, achieves 0.15% effectiveness. Compare that to B-52 losses during the same campaign. 15 Stratofortresses shot down in 11 days. These are aircraft with electronic countermeasures, chaff dispensers, tail guns, sophisticated jamming equipment. They fly in formations specifically designed to saturate defenses with overlapping protection. They operate at altitudes where SAM mechanics work optimally. They still lose 15 aircraft, nearly 3 times the F-111 losses, despite flying fewer sorties into the same airspace. The F-4 Phantom loss rate hovers around 2% for the campaign. A-6 Intruders, which also fly low-altitude night strikes, lose aircraft at 1.3% rates. Every other airframe in theater bleeds at rates that make F-111 numbers look like statistical anomalies. But anomalies repeat across 4,000 sorties stop being anomalies. They become paradigm shifts. The real story lives in sortie effectiveness. F-111 missions achieve 80% target destruction rates, meaning 4 out of 5 strikes hit intended targets with mission kill effectiveness. At night, in weather that grounds other aircraft, through defenses that should make precision bombing impossible. The aircraft doesn't just survive. It accomplishes the mission at success rates that turn strategic bombing from attrition campaigns into surgical operations. North Vietnamese commanders analyzed these numbers after the war searching for explanations that fit their understanding of air combat. The reports read like autopsies of doctrine. One SAM regiment commander documents 147 missile launches against F-111 targets during Linebacker II. Confirmed hits 0. Probable damage 0. Possible effects 0. He concludes his report with a single recommendation. Current defensive doctrine is obsolete against this aircraft type. Soviet advisors who helped design North Vietnam's integrated air defense returned to Moscow with troubling conclusions. The system works against conventional threats. It fails catastrophically against aircraft that refuse conventional profiles. The implications extend beyond Vietnam. If one American aircraft type can render Soviet defensive doctrine obsolete, what happens when the technology proliferates? What happens when every strike aircraft in NATO inventory adopts terrain-following radar and low-altitude tactics? The F-111 didn't just win battles. It killed a paradigm. For 20 years, since Soviet missiles downed Gary Power's U-2 over Sverdlovsk in 1960, integrated air defense doctrine ruled Cold War strategy. The logic seemed unbreakable. Radar sees everything. Missiles reach everything. Therefore, airspace can be denied. Moscow built its defenses on this principle. Every Warsaw Pact nation adopted the model. North Vietnam proved it worked, until one aircraft type demonstrated that working depended entirely on enemies following predictable rules. Terrain-following flight wasn't new. Pilots had been hedge-hopping since World War I, using terrain masking to avoid detection. But doing it at 600 miles per hour at night in instrument conditions through defended airspace, that required technology that didn't exist until the late 1960s. The F-111 represented the convergence of multiple revolutions: miniaturized computers, terrain-following radar, variable geometry wings, integrated avionics. Separately, each technology improved capability. Together, they created something that operated outside existing defensive frameworks. Soviet air defense theory assumed detection ranges measured in tens of miles, engagement windows measured in minutes, intercept opportunities measured in multiple chances. The F-111 compressed all three dimensions to near zero. Detection at 3 miles, engagement windows of seconds, one intercept opportunity that arrived too late. Traditional doctrine didn't fail due to equipment shortcomings or crew incompetence. It failed because the assumptions underpinning the doctrine became obsolete the moment terrain-following radar achieved operational reliability. North Vietnamese soldiers coined "whispering death" because the acoustic phenomenon captured something essential about the experience: the inversion of natural order, the arrival of death before warning, the sound of inevitability echoing through valleys after bombs had already exploded. But the name carried deeper meaning for commanders who understood what it represented. This wasn't American technological superiority in the traditional sense of better versions of existing weapons. This was categorical change, the kind that makes yesterday's doctrine irrelevant, regardless of how well you execute it. The lessons rippled through Soviet military academies for decades. How do you defend against threats that appear below radar coverage? How do you intercept aircraft that transit engagement zones before weapons can guide? How do you maintain morale in air defense crews when the enemy demonstrates your obsolescence nightly? The answers required rethinking everything: new radar wavelengths for looking down, new missile designs for rapid reaction, new doctrine accepting that some airspace couldn't be denied, only contested. The F-111 flew its last combat missions in 1996 during Operation Desert Storm, striking Iraqi command bunkers with the same contempt for integrated air defense it showed over Hanoi. By then, the aircraft was obsolete by American standards. Newer stealth technology, GPS-guided weapons, and drone warfare offered capabilities that made terrain-following radar seem primitive. But for 2 decades, it represented the cutting edge of what air power could accomplish when technology enabled tactical approaches that defensive doctrine couldn't counter. The aircraft retired from U.S. service in 1998. Australia flew them until 2010, the last F-111s in operational service anywhere. But the paradigm shift survived. Every modern strike aircraft incorporates lessons learned from watching one bomber type render an entire defensive philosophy obsolete. Low-altitude penetration, terrain masking, speed as survival. The assumption that defended airspace can be defeated not by overwhelming it, but by refusing to engage it on its terms. North Vietnam's air defense commanders gave it a name that doubled as an epitaph for their own strategy. Whispering Death wasn't just what they called the aircraft. It was what they called the future, arriving faster than sound, killing before you heard it coming, proving that yesterday's certainties become tomorrow's casualties when technology refuses to respect the old rules.